to share some thoughts from this vast and challenging experience on the arts and the science of audience engagement, let's give our PSA Scotland welcome to Rikki Arundel.
Thank you very much indeed, Scott, and it's great to be with you, if virtually. Actually, this is a great opportunity for me because it's something I've been desperately trying to do, something I think we're all going to have to learn to do. So this is actually my first virtual presentation to a live audience. I've done lots of stuff on Zoom, but never done any. Just as a matter of interest, any of you here done virtual presentations at any stage to a live audience? Oh yeah. We've got more of you beginning to do it. Excellent. So we know more and more of it's going to be happening, but I think it's a skill set that we've got to learn. I thought I'd just share just how many of you do video at all? Are you all doing some form of video, or some of you not? Who's not doing any video yet? Oh, you all are. Cool. So I'll just very quickly share, just to make sure the screen share stuff is all working here. My quick presentation on. Whoops, here we are. So this is where I am right now. So I've got two softbox lights on either side of me, which are not on in this picture, and a ring light. I find that works quite well, but I've got lots of natural daylight because I'm facing the French windows, which are now open. You can probably hear the dogs. They suddenly decided to kick off when I started speaking. My microphone, camera's in the middle of the ring, and it's pretty much, what, £300–400 setup. So not particularly expensive setup, very easy to do. And I'm finding it really good tonight because the lighting's working well for me and it really does work. I may have to nip and close the window if the dogs are going to kick off like that. That's what it looks like from the other side. So this is the great thing about doing virtual presentations. It can actually be a mess with all things all over the place, but all you're seeing is what's in screen. So it doesn't matter. Is sound okay there? Yep. And finally, my microphone, sturdy little microphone, which my Blue Yeti, which I find is a great microphone. It sits there on the desk. It's really nice and solid. Just picks up the sound. They just pick up a little bit of background sound I noticed just now, but not much. So that'll do for that for now. So, audience engagement. Now, obviously, I've done this once before in London. It's a new presentation, and that was with me being there in the audience. So this is interesting for me because I had to rethink the presentation in terms of how do you do an audience engagement presentation when you're not actually there to engage in the first place. Because I think this is one of the big challenges, isn't it, with the whole area of virtual presentations, that sense that we're not there, we're not engaged, we're not connected, but we have to be able to. As speakers, if we can't connect with the audience across that virtual space, then it's never going to work. So this is what we're going to try and do. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a story to start with, just about me. You probably can't see it quite so clearly, but I am clinically obese. That's what my doctors told me. My BMI is somewhere over 30, around about 32, 33 at the moment, but it's been coming down quite a bit. I have had a 30-year battle with my weight. I don't know why. It's just been a constant struggle. I was looking at the pictures when we launched the PSA the other day, and I thought, oh God, I'm still fat there. I can't believe it. But I've really battled this. Now, the one thing I have experience on now is diets. I have tried every single diet, and I was looking at it the other day. I've done the Weight Watchers diet numerous times. I've done the lemon diet, the grapefruit diet, the cabbage soup diet, the Mediterranean diet, the Atkins diet, which, trust me, for a vegetarian, is a real challenge. Ayurvedic diets, Paul McKenna's diet, I've been under hypnosis for it, Think Thin, 5-2, and so many more. I've just lost count of them all. Now, the great thing about all those diets is they all work, but for a limited period of time. I get the weight off, and then it all. Have any of you had this problem? You get the weight off, and then it's all comes back on again. Is that something that you're familiar with? And this is the problem. Have any of you watched the program Biggest Losers? It's an American TV show where they get loads of people who are extremely overweight and they take them in and get them to lose, loads and loads of pounds in a very short space of time. The thing about the Biggest Losers program, it's a hugely popular program. They never have reunion shows. They never get the people back together to talk about them a year or two later because they've all put the weight back on again. Almost every single case people die. And this is the big problem. So battling with all that, I then got diagnosed with diabetes about 10 years ago. And it was a pretty severe meeting, to be perfectly honest. What happened was the nurse sat me down. She said, right, this is it. You've got diabetes. It is going to kill you. This is really good. She said, what we're going to try and do is slow that down and try and keep you off meds for, I nearly passed out. The whole idea was this is a problem which is never going to go away. You're going to die from it. And so I had to go on meds. They wanted to get me on statins. And they were going to talk about, and eventually go on insulin. I thought, this is crazy. There's got to be a way out of this. I got into it. How can I get out? And then in April, I came across this book. It's a book called The Diabetes Code by Dr. Jason Fung. He's also written a book called The Obesity Code. This was the follow-up. And in it, Jason Fung says he can prevent and reverse type 2 diabetes. I thought, oh, let's do this. So I followed his ideas. Now, I'll tell you, before having done this, I had spent £500 on a diet, which meant going to regular meetings. I went on this incredible program. I had to measure every single thing I ate to the nearest gram. And it was so ridiculously stupid, every single thing. And it worked for 4 months. I lost about 4 stone in 5 months, but it was so meticulous. I just couldn't keep it up. So eventually I went off it and back onto the diet, and all the weight came back on again. Now, the thing about Jason Fung's approach is very simple. If I could show you a way to get rid of the weight, get rid of diabetes, or stop it from happening in the first place, how many of you would be interested? Okay? Yeah. Get rid of the weight, get rid of diabetes, prevent it from ever happening. Yeah, would that be you? Well, it's called intermittent fasting. And in his book, he talks through it, how you go intermittent fasting, how everything basically works, and getting onto the right kind of diet. So that was the thing. In about 2 weeks, I'd lost half a stone. I've now lost about 1.5 stone. It's been up and down, but it's so easy to get back into. Now, I'm not here to promote diet. My objective there was to try and start to play with audience engagement, even though it's over the internet. And I have to say, it's more of a struggle, because when I'm there, I can actually get people much more involved. But I used about 6 different audience engagement techniques and tools during that short presentation. So what do you think? What did I do? What did I do to try and engage the audience?
Questions?
Sorry?
Questions.
Questions, yes.
And about our personal experience, whether it's something we relate to.
Yeah, questions on your personal experience. I've got you prompting, gestures.
Telling a story.
Stories. Okay.
You used a prop with the book?
Absolutely, I used a prop. Had I been there, I would have actually got out around the audience as well, but I wasn't able to do that.
Active with your gestures and your body language.
Gestures and body language. Okay, anything else?
Made it personal.
Sorry?
Very personal.
Personal story. Yeah, it comes with the stories, doesn't it? It was a personal story. And as far as possible, yeah, one is a quite powerful personal story. There's one technique I see. I get these huge battles. What I couldn't do today, because I'm not there, is to, unless I'd sort of set something up, it was difficult to actually get specific participation going on, although I'm going to in a minute. I'm going to try that with some other things. But I had this huge argument with Graham Davis. How many of you know Graham Davis? Graham Davis hates audience participation. Absolutely hates it. He will walk out if you're not careful if you try to do it. He does not like being involved. He thinks the speaker should get up and speak. And yet, Graham Davis is one of the greatest proponents of one of the most effective audience participation techniques. What do you think it is? What does Graham do to engage his audience?
He's quite bullish and challenging.
Sorry?
He's quite challenging.
He is challenging, but
Yeah.
he's known for more than anything else for humour. He's an after-dinner speaker. He uses humour all the time, and it's probably the most important tool of audience engagement. Tell something a little bit funny, throw some humour in. That helps get people connected. And I'm going to talk a little bit about room setup and the effect that has on a humour in a minute, because it's really important to connect those things together. So there we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6. That was what I was looking for. I've got 6. I could have walked about, couldn't do that in there, but I could have actually, maybe in virtual stuff, I can actually set things up to get other people to play with that. But that's the whole area that we're looking at. There's an enormous amount that you could do, even in a couple of minutes like that. Just telling a brief story, a little bit of humor into it, a bit of powerful story, use a prop. There are so many ways that you can make sure that you engage the audience and get them connected with you. Now, I do quite a lot on storytelling in terms of speaking. I've been speaking around the PSA quite a lot on that. What would you say is our goal as a speaker? What's our goal?
Get the message over.
For what purpose?
To pass on your experience to others.
Yeah, and what would you hope to achieve with that?
Well, to probably save them a lot of pain and a lot of grief, just to try and pass over some wisdom.
Okay. And if you tell people and they do nothing with it?
No, you want them to do something.
Did you waste your time?
Making a change.
It's improving lives, making change.
Inspire them to action.
So in simple terms, what I want to do as a speaker is I want to change the world. One person at a time, one speech at a time. I have no idea what one thing I say might do to absolutely cause a chain reaction of change. When Scott introduced me, he talked about the fact that I set up the PSA. Now, it's only when I started to really think back about that, the whole thing started in 1995. I went to Minneapolis to an NSA convention in 1995, and it absolutely blew me away. I had never been. I know Maggie's there right now at the NSA convention. If you haven't been there, I do strongly suggest get yourself there, just even for once. You know, you got 2,500 speakers in one venue, 13, 14 concurrent sessions. It is just the most amazing experience. You sit down for dinner and you find you've got Brian Tracy, I had Zig Ziglar and all sorts of people like that, sitting around the table chatting with me. It was just so inspiring. I came back and thought, got to do something about this. And it took, until 98, we thought we were going to launch. It took all those years, but I slowly encouraged other people, got other people to think it was great. A couple of other people went to some chapters in America. But it was like that one thing started, and as I started to talk about it and talk to people about it and talk to people in Toastmasters in the financial service industry, and we finally launched 30th of January 1999. And I was thinking about it, it's 20 years ago since we launched. How many people do you think have been influenced by that one thing that happened, setting up the PSA? My guess is, when I look at the number of people who tell me that their entire career wouldn't have happened if they hadn't been the fact that the PSA started up, I was thinking it must be millions of people have actually been influenced and affected by something I did, by an idea, and that was because somebody in the NSA inspired me. So you have no idea how big an effect or big an impact something you do is going to have. Even when you've walked away from it, sometimes it just carries on. So the thing about audience engagement is if you walk away, if I want to change the world, in order for me to change the world, in order for me to change you, I have got you to get you to do a couple of things. Number one, I want you to remember my message. The point you made already, wasn't it? I want you to, I want to get a message across. The second point is I want you to take action. And actually, the third one, it's just a personal thing. I think I want you to remember my name. And others at times I've been at a speech and they said, "Oh, that was a great speech." I said, "Who was it?" "Oh, I can't remember now." That's the worst thing possible, isn't it? You do a great speech and nobody can remember who did it, so they can't check you out, they can't look at you on the internet, so they can't find out about you. So you're going to get your name across, get the message, and take action now. In order to achieve that, you need to make sure that people get engaged with it. If people don't engage with your content, engage with you, they're not going to remember you, especially if you're one of, I don't know, sometimes 10, 15 speakers on a day. What do you do to make sure that yours is the message that they remember? Because we have limited memories. We just can't remember everything out of a meeting. It'll all be gone by lunch. In fact, by coffee break, most people can't even remember most speeches. So that's what we're trying to do, is to get that across and get that involved. So I'm going to look at a few other thoughts around audience engagement, share a few more screens. Now let me see where I am. Back to screen share. So I'm just going to play with a couple of things that I tend to do. My background, as you know, is I changed gender, and that sort of really messed my speaking career up, and it meant that I had to completely change what I was doing. Went to Hull University, took a master's degree. While I was there, I got involved in the student union, and suddenly found that being involved in the student union and being involved in the sort of local politics helped me to sort of raise my profile in diversity, raise my profile as an activist for trans issues. And then I suddenly found that the government at the time, Tony Blair's government, was trying to bring in a huge amount of new legislation on equalities. And all of the public sector bodies around were saying, yeah, we need some representation from trans people. We don't know any of them. So suddenly there was an open door, and suddenly I could get involved, and that was what happened. I suddenly became a diversity expert simply because the world had changed and I happened to be there at the right time. So here's a couple of examples of the sorts of ways that I get people engaged, because dealing with a topic like sex and gender, it's not the topic that most people talk about, not a topic you sort of, not in public. You might have that in private conversations. So here's the one of the things that I talk about sex and gender, and here's the first issue. What is sex? What is gender? Are they the same? Are they different? What's the difference between sex and gender? Now think about this. You might sometimes get an application form or a form you've got to fill in. Sometimes it says sex M or F, and other forms will say gender M or F. Now, is that the same question? Or is that a different question? Are they asking for different bits of information? So what I'd like you to do for just a couple of minutes, just in small groups of about 3, just discuss what is the difference between sex and gender. Okay, got 2 minutes, I'm timing you. Okay. So let me first ask you, how many of you found that more difficult than you thought it was going to be? Yeah? I think most people, these are words we use and we really don't think about it. So what do we get? What do most people think was the difference between sex and gender? Just shout them out. Who's first? Some shout out. Shout out.
Hi Nikki. We thought that sex was what you would be identified with as a child. So when you're born, you're sexed as a baby.
Okay.
Female, based on your physicality, what's there. Whereas gender is how you psychologically identify with who
Okay.
you are.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
I was the same. Sex was a physical, how you physically looked, and gender was an emotional.
Okay, yeah. Physical versus emotional. These are the sorts of, come on. These are the sort of common responses. Yeah, sex is about biology, gender is about psychology. Or
And said the absolute opposite to him.
sorry?
James's wife just said the absolute opposite to what he just told you.
Oh, right. So sex is physical body, gender is in the mind. Those are the sorts of ideas that people come out. But there is an elephant in the room. And I actually started to hear you talking about it. And that's the fact that, first and foremost, sex is about bonking. Okay? It's about sexual activity. That's what, if you can have a conversation with somebody about sex, you are not going to be talking about whether they're male or female. You're not going to be going home to have gender with your partner. When we talk about sex, we talk about we talk about sexual activity, and you can do sex with same-sex partners, with opposite-sex partners. You do it with same-sex partners and opposite-sex partners at the same time. You can do it in groups. You can do it on your own. You can do it on the computer. It's called cybersex. There are all manner of things and huge amounts of legislation. But the problem is that because of that, when you mention the word sex, more often than not, people get into their heads issues around sex. So when people say homosexual, they think all about gay sex. They don't think about just two men having or two women having a relationship. And this is the issue I try to get across in my presentation. I'm not going to go any further with that because it's basically a sort of a half-hour session looking at sex and gender and what it means and why we don't really understand it. And we don't understand it because we get hung up on sex. And we've got to get apart from that and start looking at this is all about gender. My presentation is about gender. You have no idea what I've done with my body, and that's my view. That's my business. And yet people become obsessed with what have you done with your body. It's not. It's about how I present myself and how I feel comfortable in the world. So that's part of that. So, and the other thing I will say is that when you see sex, M or F on the form, they don't do that anymore. They now say gender. And the reason for that is very simple, that most people used to write that on their form. So, which gives you an idea that we are obsessed with sex as opposed to gender. So, back in the 1960s, this book really inspired me. It's a book called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am by John Powell. In it, Powell says, I'm afraid to tell you who I am because if I tell you who I am and you don't like who I am, that's all I have. Now, as a trans person, I was terrified for most of my life until the age of 50, absolutely terrified that somebody would find out that I was secretly trans, that I secretly cross-dressed, that I secretly went to clubs with other men who liked to cross-dress. And I kept it a secret. I even didn't let the police, I refused to stop for the police once because I was more terrified about being caught cross-dressed than being arrested later on for failing to stop. And the thing is that this fear is something interesting. As a speaker, what do you think is our greatest fear in life? What a human being's greatest fear in life, do you think? What do we fear most?
Not being loved. Rejection.
Not being loved. Okay, close, yeah. Any other thoughts?
Rejection. Shut up, Bruce. Rejection. Spider. Rejection. Rejection.
Rejection. Yeah, I think it's part of it. It's not quite the same thing. It's not quite there. It's not the thing we fear most, but it's connected with rejection.
Shame.
Sorry?
Shame.
Pain.
Judgment. Shame and judgment.
Ah ha ha. These are all the possible fears you can have, but you're absolutely right. The thing that we fear more than anything else is shame, humiliation, ridicule, looking foolish. People used to say to me, oh, the greatest fear in life, and I've seen lists that say greatest fear in life, speaking to a group of people. I say, well, why on earth would people be terrified of speaking in public? What's the worst that can happen? It just happens public speaking is probably the quickest way to completely humiliate yourself in front of all your friends and your colleagues at work if you don't get it right. We are terrified about being shamed. Most kids who commit suicide at school do so because of the shame. The issues around transgender, you get diagnosed with being gender dysphoric. That's this extreme sense of distress with feeling that you're in the wrong body. It isn't that which causes the stress. It's the way other people treat you because of that causes the stress. Nearly half of kids who are trans attempt suicide at some point before they're 25. And it's horrendous. But this is an area that we've got to deal with. So, and this is another area can you see where you can get a discussion going, get people involved in discussion. What I'm doing here is pulling out different answers from the audience, trying to seek. Sometimes I get the right answer. It doesn't matter. I can help people along till I get to the right answer. But even online, I'm still able to do that and have an engaged conversation, just drawing bits out. And sometimes I actually will say, no, wrong answer, simply because I want to for the effect. Other times I'm going to help people and encourage people, as I did there, by saying, yeah, nearly, that's almost there. What do you think it is? So that's another technique for engaging the audience, is asking a question, which is quite a difficult question, drawing people in to try and think about what's going on and think about how they might be happening now. So, whoops, that slide supposed to have gone. Now, the other thing I do on my workshops is I use a video. Now, I've seen a lot of people use videos, show a video, isn't that great, and on we go. What I found is that I show a 10-minute video. I sometimes show that on keynotes as well. Depends, how engaged I can get the audience and how much time I've got. But I found that with a video, I was having difficulty getting across some of the challenges and difficulties faced by trans people as they grow up. So I've got this video, it's about 10 years old now, and it's a family coping with twins, one of whom is transgender. And so what we did on that was to simply get everybody talking about the topic. I show them the video, and then simply when the video is over, say, right, what I want you to do is to discuss what struck you most. So people watch the video, they discuss that for about 10, 15 minutes, depends on how long we've got available, sometimes just 5 minutes, doesn't matter. Just enough to get people thinking about it. I do some talks for one or two schools, Tunbridge School in Kent, and you probably know, Tunbridge School is a boys' school, and it's the sixth form I'm dealing with, so they're sort of 16, 17-year-old lads, and there's about 250 of them, and I'm talking about transgender issues. Now, when I first did that, I have to tell you, I scared the life out of me when I got that book, and I thought, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? And I thought, and I've heard people get massacred as speakers in front of an audience like that because, they can be completely dead or they can give you a lot of hard time. So what I did was get them involved in a discussion, discussing a video, discuss something else. And what I found is once you get people thinking about a topic and discussing it, in that case, I got them to do these, what's the difference between sex and gender? Once it starts to free up their mind, they start talking, they throw a few answers back. What I then find is that later on, when I got to the end of my speech and they said, right, okay, anybody got any questions? Every hand of the audience went up. There were firing questions. We had a 15-minute really engaged question session about the topic because they were now comfortable about questioning it, comfortable about talking about the topic, and comfortable about getting really involved and engaged in the whole process. So that's that. So the other thing that I do is use case studies and scenarios. Now, I'm sure most of you have probably used case studies on workshops, on longer courses, but you can use case studies even inside of a keynote presentation. If you've got a 45-minute presentation, and it depends on the type of audience, it probably wouldn't work so well if you're talking to 1,000 people, but certainly the kind of audiences that many of us are speaking to, where you've got 50, 100, 150 people there, you can quite easily get people talking to each other in small groups beside each other. And and get them sort of talking. Here's a couple of examples of the sorts of things that I will throw up within a keynote presentation, just to get people to talk for a minute, give me some feedback, and think about the topic. So what I'm doing here is I've given them some content, and now towards the end, I'm going to say, right, you've had some content. Think about how this would work if you take this away. How are you going to use this when you go away? So this is a typical example of the sort of case study. You're about to start recruiting for additional staff, and you've been asked to try to improve representation from some underrepresented communities, including the trans community. How would you do this without discrimination? So the thing about discrimination and the discrimination law is it works both ways. It's not just negative discrimination that's illegal. Positive discrimination is also illegal. And the big case, which you may know about, was the person who got taken to court because they'd advertised for Scottish Daily required, and they got into all sorts of trouble because that was considered to be a discriminatory advertisement. You can't distinguish and say only Scottish, because that's basically racial discrimination. And there was a battle over that, which they lost. They had to. Now the question is, how do you recruit people from, if you want to recruit more gay staff, or more Muslim staff, or black staff, or trans staff, how do you recruit those staff if you can't discriminate positively? Think about that and start to work through it. If anybody wants to know the answer to that question, I'm happy to answer. But can you see how that would actually get you quite engaged in a discussion? For you could probably go on for probably spend 15 minutes trying to work that one out, but it gets you. Here's another example. Jay, a colleague, identifies as non-binary. This is new. This is happening. It's a new thing that's causing all sorts of challenges for people. They have asked everyone to use plural pronouns when referring to them or speaking about them. At a meeting, you notice most people are still using gendered pronouns. How would you deal with that? Now, there's no clear, simple answer to these questions. So what we're saying is that what would happen if you're at a meeting, or you've got maybe at PSA Scotland, if somebody arrived and said, well, I'm non-binary, it's quite a challenge to not use he or she when you're talking about them. How do you deal with that? Without offending them, without upsetting them? How do you make sure that happens? And if you hear people making comments that are still using the pronouns, what would you do if you're running the meeting to try to encourage people to get with it and start doing it properly? So can you see how that, again, can get you engaged in in fact, why don't we do it? 2 minutes, just have a think about it. How would you deal with somebody being misgendered in a meeting? Somebody who's trans being called male when they're actually female, or basically somebody non-binary wanting alternative pronouns. How would you help to deal with that? Couple of minute discussion, and let's hear your ideas. Okay. Let me hear some feedback. What do you think?
So who's got some ideas? Are you going to go now? Are you volunteering?
No, I have no idea. I have had non-binary people in my workshops, Rikki, but I haven't known how to really deal with it. So I'd love your feedback on it.
Okay, fine. I'm more than happy to do it, because it is a challenge. And what we've got, the government has just done a big, huge survey in the LGBT community. 110,000 respondents. It's the biggest LGBT survey ever conducted anywhere in the world. And what they found was that about 1% of the population, from the research they've done, it indicates about 1% are non-binary. It's about half as many as there are trans, or people identifying as transgender. A lot of people who were previously identified as transgender are now saying, actually, I'm non-binary. And it's a bit of a challenge, because what they're saying is, I find it uncomfortable if you address me by the pronouns which apply to my sex. So, I identify now as female. Most people address me as female. If I was non-binary, what would you do? Well, people have been inventing and trying to come up with all sorts of ideas of new pronouns, and it doesn't work because nobody can remember them, and there are too many competing ones. But the easiest thing, and the thing that writers have already started to do, and you'll know, I'm sure you'll know, particularly for non-fiction books, if you're writing about the reader, now in the old days you always used to assume it was he and default to he as the preferred pronoun. And what that meant was that, the book was really meant for men, but women, you can read it if you want. So what happened is a lot of women started saying, well, I'll just call them she. So the men said, well, it's not for men then, is it? And that's so, you've got this battle going on because people feel uncomfortable if they, oh, they said she, that really doesn't apply to men then. So what writers are increasingly doing now, and certainly what I did in my books, was to start using plural pronouns, talk about they and them, and it's relatively easy to do that, or talk about, use someone's actual name, which is probably a good way to do it. So how do you remember to use plural pronouns? Because I find it difficult. It's relatively new. This has only really been happening big time for the past 2 or 3 years. I've been more aware of it since I was at university because it was beginning to happen then. So I think the idea is to think about somebody who's non-binary as having the spirit of man and woman in one person. That's how the North American Indians consider it. So if you think that this is actually not one person, this is two spirits, two people inside one, the moment you start thinking of them as two people, then plural pronouns become an automatic, obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
And just use someone's name or use the plural pronouns. And if you hear somebody getting it wrong, just quietly say it's they, it's them, or use their name, or it's Jamie, it's Jack. Just so that people get the idea, because you've got people like Jack Monroe, who is everybody's confused with. Jack identifies as non-binary, was born female, doing lots of books, recipe books for people who don't have much money, and is getting enormous amounts of really, really bad trolling on the internet. Some horrendous things being said about them, and you think, why on earth is that? So yeah, people who are non-binary have a bit of a hard time, probably worse than people who are gay or lesbian or trans.
One of the things you talked about was the fact that quite often speakers will use the phrase, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And so it's potentially changing that, if any of us are using that, to good evening, everybody, for example.
I think it is. We need to begin to think about, well, by saying ladies and gentlemen, we're then automatically excluding the people who don't identify within that. And it is increasing. There's an increasing number of people saying, no, I'm not comfortable as either male or female. I want to be somewhere in between. And the first time I started hearing it was, I used to go to a club in London called the Way Out Club, and it was good evening, boys and girls, and in-betweenies. No, these are some of the changes in diversity which we're slowly having to get to come to terms with. And, so I just thought that would be an interesting scenario. But can you see how that works to get people thinking about it, tackling the problem, maybe not even coming up with an answer, and then, but at least now you're thinking, well, how do I deal with this? What is the problem? So going away, you won't have just heard me speak about it. You've thought about it. You've got the idea in your head. And now when you're confronted with it, you think, oh, yeah, no, what do I do here? It's just, so now you've got some action to be able to take on it. So do you see how this starts to fit in with my goal of what I'm trying to do is to get across the message, get you to take action, and also remember me. So it does start to work. Okay. So these were the just to summarize on the sort of tools here, and look at the time here, we're roughly running up at 8. So powerful personal stories, the #1 skill of audience engagement. And the reason we know this is so powerful, they did some research in Princeton University, and what they did was they got a woman to tell stories, recorded some stories, and they did an MRI scan on her while she was telling the story. So they got a pattern of what was happening with her brain while she told the story. She told the story in both English and in her own language, which was Latvian. And they wanted to try and make sure that it was not that the connection between the storyteller and the listener was about the story, not about tone of voice or something like that. So they then took a bunch of students, put them in the MRI scan, so they listened to the stories. They listened to stories in both Latvian and English. None of them could speak Latvian. And what they found was that listening to the English story, the brain pattern of the students absolutely matched the brain patterns of the storyteller. It was like they plugged the emotion from one straight into the other. There was an absolute synchronicity between the two. When they looked at the foreign language, as far as the students are concerned, didn't have any effect at all. It only happens because of the story and the way they listen to the story. Stories connect you with the audience more powerfully than anything else you can think of. It's the most effective way to engage your audience. The second most effective way is laughter and humor. There's an old saying in NSA, do you have to use humor in your story, in your keynote? Answer, only if you want to get paid. You must learn to use humor. It's a skill. It's not something you're just naturally born with. You have to learn humor, and you get that. So if you want to learn humor, probably grab Celia Delaney sometime and talk to her. She's the wizard of that. Asking questions. Very simple, easy way. Just asking questions, as you see, with even across the internet here, doing it virtually. It's easy to do that. Prompting gestures, audience participation, getting people to do things. I think the audience participation is something I'm going to need to work on. How do you do that virtually? Because I think it's about setting things up so that stuff can happen with somebody helping at the other end. Pairing and group exercises, they work. Getting people to do things together, getting people to do things in groups. Props can work. Haven't got to the walkabout and interact virtually yet. Maybe I could send a holograph eventually. Video discussion, case studies, scenarios. I could easily have shown a little video and got you to discuss that if I needed to. And it's a very effective way of engaging the audience. So there's 10 effective tools that you can use to engage your audience more effectively and make sure that it all works. Just going to finish with a couple of things on room layout, and then you can go get your lunch. Now, dinner. Hotels are a nightmare, aren't they? When you go there, they have these setups. These are the formats. Now, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. The problem is you'll notice already that they've got, even when it's cabaret, they've got a top table in. You may not want one. Theatre style, centre aisle, right down the middle. Maybe you don't want that. You can do it herringbone, classroom style, boardroom, U-shaped. Now, these are just some of the layouts. These are the standard ones. I use a whole variety of different ones. I use things that are, I'll create things like concentric semicircles of chairs around. I've done stuff in the round with a circle of people right around me when I'm doing open space presentations. Think about your room layout. Think about how that affects your audience engagement. And if you're speaking where you can't control the room layout, make sure you know what the room layout's about. What's going to be happening there? I've turned up to some meetings and suddenly thought, oh my God, how am I going to handle this? Everything I've been planning isn't going to work because I can't move on the stage, I can't come off the stage, the audience can't see me. Have any of you been in a situation where they bring the lights down, you can't even see the audience? It's like pitch black. Really, really hard to engage with an audience that actually can't be seen. So, there we go. So here's a couple of things. Think about those venue challenges that you might want to think about. How does your audience engagement plan work with what's going to be on at the venue? Think about the standard lists. Is that okay for you? Do you want something different? Do you want a top table? How do you want those things organized around for that? Because that can mess up. Where are your props? Where are the things that you need to be able to grab hold of to be able to give to the audience? Rule 1 for all presentations, get there early. You can guarantee that when you get there, it ain't going to be how you expected it. Something will be not the way you want it. I've seen completely, I've given in hotels sometimes a very clear layout of what I want to do. I get there, they've just taken one of their standard layouts and set it up. And I've had to completely reset a room for 150 people and change all the layout, pull in staff to do it because we've got an hour to completely relay out a room. I said, oh, we did it last night. No, it's wrong. How many chairs? I have a simple rule. If you're expecting 50 people, put out 40 chairs. When the chairs are filled, bring out the other chairs as if somehow you hadn't expected so many. But also it makes people sit next to each other. If you've got a room for 100, that seats 100 people and 50 arrive, you can guarantee people will not sit. They'll make space. And the thing about it is, if you're going to use humor and engagement, it's much harder if everybody's all spread out. Bringing people together, much more effective to get them involved, get them to talking to each other, get them engaged with each other, get them laughing with each other. Really, really works. Pack out the room. If you find yourself with a big room and you have enough people coming, put tables in, make it cabaret style. Just fill the room out so it looks like it was supposed to be like this. So there we go, and I think that's probably about it. So I'm going to stop the share there. We're back to there. It's time for your meal.
Rikki, any quick questions for Rikki first of all before we have a break for supper? Any quick questions, anybody? All engaged out? Well, so far so wonderful. Thank you to Rikki so far.